Zips.
Okay. So should we start? What is the protocol here?
Hello. Yes, I think you can start if you are ready. Not simply to say that all these sessions are under the guidelines and rules of the United Nations, and that's all. At the end, every attendee is redirected to a feedback form, which is most welcome. And that's all. Please go ahead and have a good session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Katie,
Are we now
do you
live?
want to pick up? Yes, we are.
Okay. All right, great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Katie Kummer, EY's Global Deputy Vice Chair for Public Policy. We have a terrific group of speakers for this panel, all of whom have deep experience with emerging policy issues surrounding technology, the internet, and AI. We have a diverse group representing perspectives from intergovernmental organizations, technical and standards associations, business, NGOs, and think tanks. I'll let them each introduce themselves in a moment. But first, we all know that the rapid adoption of AI is having a tremendous impact on business and society. Like all technological change, this creates opportunities as well as risks. We see this firsthand in EY's business as well as with our clients. With AI, one significant risk is trust. Trust that outcomes are accurate and unbiased, trust that data is protected from unauthorized access, trust that technology is used ethically. E&Y and the Future Society recently did a study on bridging the AI trust gap. We surveyed policymakers as well as those in industry and found some significant differences in how the two groups think about AI, trust, ethics, and governance. For example, our survey found that the biggest absolute gap in ethical priorities between the private and public sectors concerns fairness and avoiding bias. In 7 of 12 use cases, policymakers placed this among the 3 most important principles, but companies did not. The second largest gap was around innovation. Not surprisingly, industry prioritized innovation more strongly across the board. This could suggest that companies may not be fully assessing ethical risks during their R&D process, or at least not in a way that meets the expectations of policymakers and the public. Poor alignment diminishes public trust in AI, which in turn slows innovation and the adoption of critical applications. Our view is that strong governance and appropriate consistent regulations can lead to ethical trusted AI. If AI is fair, transparent, and explainable, this will increase public trust, facilitating further adoption. Focused multi-stakeholder discussions like the one we're having today will help further the debate on what governance could be implemented to strengthen trust and confidence in the use of AI. Closing the AI trust gap is a top priority. So let's get the discussion started. We're going to begin by having our panelists introduce themselves and make a few opening remarks. Then we'll move into a moderated discussion, followed by audience Q&A. So please send in questions as we go through the discussion at any point. So first, let me turn to Dr. Ansgar Kune. Ansgar is one of my public policy colleagues at EY who serves as our global AI ethics and regulatory leader. Ansgar?
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody to this panel. It's great to be back at the IGF. So let me briefly outline a little bit what my role is as Global AI Ethics and Regulatory Leader at EY. What does this actually entail? So part of this is indeed engaging with the global public policy team to help with supporting the way in which public policy in this space is being developed by providing insights from the kinds of information that EY is getting through its internal work and also through its engagement with clients. Another important aspect of my work is working internally in helping to shape our own governance frameworks around AI to make sure that any types of AI projects that we are developing internally will adhere to best practices around the use of AI to make sure that it doesn't cause unintended harms, does not run afoul of any kinds of regulatory requirements, but also thinking about the ethical and societal implications of the kinds of projects that we are working with. A third aspect of my work within EY is to support the teams that are doing developing our trusted AI framework, which is one of the offerings within our consulting side of work that is helping business community in thinking through the implications of introducing AI systems. So my thinking actually and my engagement with the work around trust and AI is actually predated even my joining of EY. It was even part of my work at the University of Nottingham in the academic space on 2 projects that were really focusing on the impact of digital technologies on society, engaging with how do people experience their engagement with these kinds of technologies. What are the issues that they feel are problematic? One of these kinds of issues, for instance, being questions around fundamental understanding of how do these systems work? Why do they collect certain types of data about me in order to do this kind of processing? Am I retaining sufficient control over the direction in which these things are going? Part of the work that we were doing in the academic space was that we really wanted to translate this into take it out of the academic bubble and translate it into the whole technical and business and also policy space, which is one of the ways in which I started to engage with the IEEE. So as part of my work with the IEEE, I'm chairing one of their standards working groups to develop a standard algorithmic bias considerations. I'm also engaging with NGOs and charitable foundations around the rights of young people online. So really trying to look at a broad perspective, how are these technologies impacting society? How can we make sure that there is justified trust in these systems? Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ansgar. Next up is Dr. Clara Neppel, Senior Director of European Operations at IEEE.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction and thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure being here and thank you, Ansgar, for the collaboration during all these years. So my name is Clara Neppel. I'm the Senior Director of IEEE Europe. Ansgar mentioned it briefly. We are the, if you want, so the world's largest technical organization in the world. We have around 400,000 members worldwide in almost every country in the world. And our members are, just as Ansgar, involved in different phases of technology development and standardization. So from research and development to deployment. And also, I think what's interesting, and when I'm talking about technology, it is from electrical engineering, which is in our name, one of the, well, 2 of the E's, and up to quantum computing, blockchain, and obviously on AI. So the reason why I'm here is because IEEE also as a technical community started quite early on, I would say, so with this effort on recognizing the responsibility of the technical community for the impact of the technology that they are creating. That was, I think, 2015 with initiative which is called, well, the Global Initiative of Intelligent Autonomous Systems. And since then, this initiative created quite a lot of outcomes, maybe the most important one being the report on ethically aligned design, where engineers together with different stakeholders from civil society try to identify the issues around these autonomous intelligence systems and also to come up with recommendations on how to address this. Some of these recommendations being for us, the technical community, but a lot of them being also addressed to policymakers. And since then, we are engaging with a lot of international organizations We're part of the OECD One AI group, part of the Council of Europe, similar initiative of the European Union, and so on. So we are also engaging in standard setting, since we are a standard setting organization. Probably all of you use now our most popular standard, Wi-Fi standard. But as Ansgar mentioned, we are also now engaging in other kind of standards that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Clara. Our next panelist is Dr. Yoko Hatada, CEO and founder of Evolution of Mind Life Society Research Institute. Yoko.
Nice to meet you, everybody. And thank you very much for Kathy and Ansgar to invite me for this extremely exciting and timely event and discussion. Yes, as Catherine introduced, I am a founder and director and CEO of the EMSI, which is the Evolution of Mind Life Society Research Institute. And I established this one in 2013. Before I was academics, in the particularly as a whole interested in the question of evolution and development of life. So I was looking at a bit longer time span of 4.5 billion years of how the global ecosystem evolved. Yeah, and then now, and then after then, actually, from 2010, actually, I was a little bit involved in Japanese politics because opposition party got a power, and then I was quite excited at the time. And 2 years there in Japan, and actually, I experienced Fukushima nuclear disaster there, and then how the politics as democracy could be easily, you know, kind of a disaster moment if the democracy is not founded very deep in the society. And I saw the vulnerable moment at once, overnight, actually. And I fought there, but I felt myself really powerless. And so I came back 2012 to Britain back. And then I built this EMSRI because actually the integrity of society is really depend on the democratic system, which actually we are seeing a transformation of I don't know, American situation. It's quite dramatically, which is very much actually related to this current this AI system issue as well. And also the gradual so much from Arab Spring to Snowden liberation to this Britain also Brexit and American election. So very much looking at this technology issue in terms of societal and democratic, humane civilizational development struggle towards global civilization to develop. So because my background in the academics was, as I said, evolutionary developmental neuroscience, and also about cognitive neuropsychology, and also I'm very much interested in inside brain, how we process information related to the outer external input, how we eat the information, and how we create, construct our mind, and then how we become or develop as an agency, and then act on back to the society itself, and how we create information. And then this moment, I think as whole civilization, I think we are trying to construct the global society, because already internet is connected to the world, but we are still on the process, and hopefully we can bring to the positive side, because we know, like Stephen Hawking, he was very worried about how the technology can be actually can destroy the human civilization. We are the last generation, could be he was talking, and I hope this actually we can avoid, and actually more constructive, positive, flourishing civilization to build. And this meeting, I think, we hope we can contribute something. Thank you.
I think folks will hear throughout the session today such an important aspect when it comes to trust in AI. So
Yes.
thanks, Yoko. Next, we have Parminderjeet Singh, the Executive Director of IT for Change.
Thank you, Catherine, and thanks, Ansgar, for inviting me to this important panel dealing with the most important question, perhaps most important contemporary question about how we regulate or ensure the so-called behavior of what is the most strong, not only economic, but social cultural force around us. I come from IT for Change, which is an organization which has been around for about 15 years, which deals with the intersection of the digital with social change. We have been involved we do practical work in the field also, but a lot with regulatory questions about who governs the internet, what is the just internet. We actually have a global coalition called Just Net Coalition, and we have to look at, for example, now just AI as well. What are the concepts of justice? And we try to bring these concepts from traditional theoretical and spaces of practice, because justice does not change. Equality, equity, these concepts don't change, but they have to be now applied to a completely new arena. So how does that application take place is the kind of questions we raise and try to deal with. For example, it's much before AI came. There is this element that ICTs or technical systems or digital systems can get laws and rules embedded in them. And once you have embedded rules into a technical architecture, you never perhaps need those rules to make actors comply. And now those rules and laws would get embedded into AI systems, and what their implication is, and how do societies keep control on their democratic rule-making processes. So these are the kind of questions we bring to AI governance. Thank you, Catherine.
Great, thanks, Parminder. And then last but not least, we have Abdul Hakim Ajijola, Chair of the African Union Cybersecurity Expert Group.
Thank you very much for inviting the African Union. I happen to be a stand-in, so I can just do my best. So I will start with a disclaimer. The views that I may express are mine and not necessarily those of the African Union, so that people in the African Union won't be saying, oh my God, what has he said? But let me just mention a couple of things. First of all, there is an African proverb that says, tomorrow belongs to those who prepare today. And interestingly, many of us Thank you. So many of us are unknowingly using AI systems in our daily lives. For example, our smartphones with their smart assistants like Google Assistant, Alexa, Siri, or Bixby. And indeed, sometimes when we use our phones in phone cameras in the portrait mode, like I noticed Parminder was doing, we also use AI systems in smart cars and drones. And we all know about Tesla cars, but maybe not as many of us know about aerobotics in South Africa that is helping farmers with drones and data powered by AI. Even in Kenya, the Kenya Wildlife Service is using drones with AI to catch wildlife poachers. There's a company in Rwanda called Zipline, which is using AI and drones to deliver blood to remote locations. Indeed, in my country, AI-supported drones are used in Nollywood to make movies. We also see the use of AI extensively across the continent in social media feeds. We're beginning to see media streaming services. We have our Spotifys and Netflixes and YouTubes, Africa Magic, Iroko TV. They are all beginning to rely on these things. A lot of Africans are now getting into the online video gaming. In fact, I've been asked to be a patron of the esports association, which is getting registered. Certainly, when we see the online ads on our social networks, these are all underlined and driven by AI. Some of us, again, across Africa, we use navigation and travel tools such as, Google or Apple Maps for calling an Uber or even booking a flight ticket. And certainly, African banking and finance are using, AI-driven mechanisms for customer service, fraud protection, investment, and more. Some of us may be fortunate enough across Africa to have smart home devices. It's a growing area, and many of these devices, including smart electricity meters, somehow tied into AI. And certainly, those areas of security and surveillance, object recognition, facial recognition, including door openers, that we're beginning to see offices across the continent. Sadly, AI, especially in the developed world, is also being used to develop killing machines and new machines of war. And frankly, almost all advanced nations are working on some kind of, autonomous systems, from smart missiles and drones to tanks, guns, and even a new generation of smart bullets that can actually go around corners. And so, we must ask ourselves who bears responsibility for the mistakes of AI developed in one part of the world, but applied in another place that may have very different environment. And I mean different environment in the broad sense, social, economic, not just physical environment. It is interesting to note that about only, I think, 28 out of 157 UN countries of the UN are currently seeking to prohibit full autonomous weapons under the Convention on Global Conventional Weapons. And sadly, notably, countries like the United States, Russia, Israel, Australia, and South Korea are not even willing to support such negotiations for a legally binding set of instruments that would ensure meaningful human control over the critical functions of these weapon systems. And so I really ask myself, and I hope it's something we'll touch on as we go through, where does Africa feature in some of these discussions, at least in these conversations? Where do we feature in moving some of these things positively forward, constructively forward? Because at the end of the day, once these systems are in place, all Africans, the underserved, the unserved, the unborn, are going to have to live with the precedents, are going to have to live with the results, are going to have to live with the effects, positive or otherwise, of artificial intelligence driven systems. Thank you.
Thanks, Abdul Hakim, and you had warned us that your connection is not great where you are, so we do appreciate you joining us. We lost audio, but at least we can still hear you. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
As the audience can hear, you've now seen the great panel that we have, so please feel free to send in questions. Like I said, we'll start with some moderated discussion, but I'm happy to address any audience questions as well. So wanted to start out with, trust and trustworthiness are so fundamental to functioning society, including the adoption of innovative tools and services such as those for which, AI is being used. So from your perspectives, what are the key attributes of a trusted AI systems and outcomes? And Parminder, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so first of all, there are a few attributes of what we call and know AI as, which we have to keep in mind. One is that they are ubiquitous. If they are not, they would be ubiquitous. I mean, you're getting an appointment with your barber would have an AI element in it, right up to Abdul was saying about weapons would have AI. So it's kind of a systematic brain which is running all aspects of our life. All aspects means all aspects. There would be artificial intelligence in home equipments, everywhere. So one is that it's everywhere. Second, it is extremely powerful. I think it's easy to see that of any system, it's the brain or the controlling and coordinating part which is most powerful. And AI, it would be the brain of your home equipments, of the weapon systems, of your organization and all. So it's most powerful and ubiquitous. So we have not seen a thing like this before. So that's the first part. And therefore, when we see at its accountability or a trustworthiness, we need to be able to see at many levels. It's at the level of an individual, it's at the level of a community, it's a level of a national system. Within organizations who produce IT, the ethical behavior would be of the person, the worker, it would be of an organization, there would be industry-wide self-regulation rules, but then there are larger social, regulatory, governance, and political systems. So it's on all these levels as our typical governance and ethics systems apply. So it's all across. We in our work can focus on some over the other, and that would need to be done as specialists for organizational ethics, others for community ethics, other was what politics deals with, powerful systems, but they need to be separately seen, but also need to be synced. So a trusted AI system need to have enough governance and ethical systems at all levels. It could be personal ethics to right up to the political system. When I talk today, I would largely, and that's the work IT for Change does, focus on the governance systems at a political to regulatory level and system design level, which comes in a form of a regulation. And I think two principles are key. First is the political aspect of it. These systems are so strong and they almost control and determine your life to that extent that it's the trust but verify principle. Finally, people may be good, organizations may be good, but this is the kind of thing which I need to know who governs the system, who owns the system, what kind of actual control I have over them through somebody whom I trust, which should be a representative of me. And the representative, of course, means the democratic system and all kind of representation system. So those political systems become very important, and I'll come back to it later, because we would be making, while governing these powerful systems, trade-offs between efficiency and their trustworthiness, accountability, explainability. That trade-off is going to stare in our face again and again, which we will say, okay, we can manage to not take certain degree of efficiency, but we need to make this system complex and less efficient, but it should be explainable, etc. So political trade-offs of this kind are always done at a political level. We get together as a community, we have our democratic systems. So first of level, we need to understand that it is at a democratic and political level that the largest decisions will be taken. It will not be enough to trust some people's goodness. And I will later on discuss the Open AI organization, which did start in a certain manner, but has faced some criticism because you can't really just go by a set of do-gooders. And I myself am an NGO and a do-gooder, so I'm not running them down, but finally people need to be able to trust people, and that's whom they trust is generally the people who represent them. The second part of it is the basic system designs which should be behind how AI develops after the first level. I think we are in the first phase where it is a demo phase. We have seen what is AI. We're still seeing it, what is its power, how it can govern system. And I think in a few years and all, we would have seen it all. But before things go out of hand and systems by default become settled as code is law and architecture is policy, before that, we need to intervene to give some directions about systemic manner in which AI systems are developed. And for me, the example of financial systems come to my mind. Finance is something which is again very powerful and needs extreme accountability. And that is why in our day-to-day life, up to organizational life, to national systems, financial systems are extremely complicated, if I may say that. Everything had to produce a receipt. It could have a double entry. Everything is copied over a few times. Why? It could have been made much less efficient, but much more efficient, but just people go and do something and there's a transaction and somebody gives money, the other guy takes money and become richer. But everything is copied many times over. I think that's a good example, and AI is even more powerful than finance, and therefore AI systems should have systematically integrated these kind of copying, record keeping systems across all systems, a generic design, and which would need to be kind of fine-tuned to specific context-based designs. So I think one principle of political regulation and other principle of architectural regulation, which I just now described, is for me key, and then there will be much more beyond this. So I think at this point I will stop here.
Great, thanks, Parminder. Yoko, your thoughts on some of the key attributes?
Actually, when I saw this title, actually, the confidence and trust, how we can gain in the system. I had a kind of a little bit challenging questions. I mean, is the confidence and trust, this relationship between. It's actually, first of all, very much. I'm trying to speak from the individual point of view. Pamela really described very beautifully from all aspects of even politically how we can actually systematically, as a function, try to consolidate, and then really build up, and that's really important. And actually, at the end, individual, even policymaker or leader, political leader, as each individual really have to, I think, participate. And the citizen also, it's not like some are victims, some are, governor. It's not. Actually, everybody have to create, because we don't have yet, I think. And when I think about this relation between confidence and trust, I think, first of all, we have to understand who we are. And quite often, we are asking who we are. At the end, using this system, we have to answer to this question. But I would like to ask that question very first, who we are. Unless we understand actually self, we respond on the system wrongly. And that's actually sometimes meddler can actually abuse the system. So first of all, we have to have a self-understanding. And then if you deeply understand, then of course you have to understand the world. And then when you understand the world, then you can have sort of some possibility, capacity of confidence within yourself. And then with this confidence, so let's say information could be, quite many are fake, and which one to trust, which one is not trustworthy. That kind of judgment, moment done by the individual. And the policymaker, how we should make a system. Should we regulate? Over regulation is not actually freedom of expression is lost, and we are not actually promoting everybody's discussion. All those kind of, the confidence is, I think, when we understand, when we are really relation to self, actually start to have a meaning. Without proper understanding, even you have a confidence, it's just overconfidence, and it doesn't make any positive development. So have to understand how much we are understanding. In the judgment of self, the confidence, is it right or not? Those are actually, when we interact, we see the consequence. And then sometimes actually overconfidence is lost by response from what happened in the world. So the right level of confidence, and then if we understand, even the situation itself is still like a mess. But if you have your understanding is this level and what needs to be done, then actually, regardless of environment, the confidence built inside ourselves, within the system also. Then where to tackle? Then we can become proper kind of a user, which means a trustworthy system, the user. But actually reality is not, and we are process of building. So actually the trust is, first of all, self-understanding, and then built on the self-understanding, we have confidence, and then with proper confidence, appropriate confidence, we make a trustworthy system. So basically, when I think about what is the right kind of a question to ask, and what kind of system to build, Because if our society itself, we are not having a proper democratic society yet, then actually when we are trying to build a democratic system, the judgment from a different sector, multi-stakeholder, actually very difficult to come to the conclusion, same line. And then it is difficult to go ahead. For example, in the world, different regime, we are trying to make some kind of development together. And then how can we make it? That's, I think, really we have to understand how we can, which kind of global future society we are trying to make. Because some of them, if you have to compromise to, let's say, make some kind of a deal, then actually what we are losing by that, and something we cannot lose at all. Then how can we make the international global kind of rule, for example?
Yeah.
And I think those are actually, we are now asked under this corona situation, corona crisis, because
Right.
yeah, corona crisis actually giving us some kind of window, because Pamina was talking about finance. Actually, quite many corporates are struggling, and the government is really printing a lot of money. And I think it's an incredible situation, and which before even taxation, actually, it was so difficult to implement. But now, suddenly, some, halfway almost transformation is required. Otherwise, we cannot tackle the corona pandemic because it's global. So as the internet. So
Great.
yeah, I think altogether it's the confidence which is we have to build from our own self-understanding.
Yeah, great points. Thanks so much, Joko. Abdul Hakim, your thoughts? I think you're on mute.
I think, thank you. I think there's a question by somebody or a comment, Evangeni Toniki. Forgive me for butchering the name, but I think the key takeaway from their observation, which I would reiterate here, is the need for a high level of transparency. What you find is that in too much of the value chain of AI development, there's a lot of opaqueness. And so it's back to the issues that Parmenda had mentioned about governance. Who really determines at the end of the day, what are the boundaries? What should the boundaries be? Bearing in mind that even though Parmenda had indicated government, and yes, government must have a strong say, but what you usually find is that governments and especially legislation are too inflexible to keep up with rapidly evolving sectors such as artificial intelligence and the like. So that we must have mechanisms that are a bit more responsive. And probably we could look at situations where governments can devolve some of their powers to regulators, to the technology community, probably to some kind of multi-stakeholder platform, so that those boundaries can be adjusted as the technology evolves. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Abdul Hakim. Next question, and if we can ask the panelists, there's so much to talk about in these areas. I know we could probably have a half-a-day session on this, but if we can, try and keep responses to about a minute. The first question, clearly, when we talk about key attributes, just covers all sorts of realms, and so we did, cover lots of territory there. So I think that was great. The remaining ones get a little more granular, so maybe if people can kind of give a minute or so of their thoughts, that'd be great. Next thing I want to talk about is just, and we touched on it a little bit, lack of accountability is really often cited as a cause of irresponsible behavior, with clear allocation of accountability in organizations seen as providing really the backbone for high quality outcomes. So who do you think is accountable when something goes wrong in an AI system? Ansgar, why don't we turn it to you?
Thank you very much. And yes, as you already pointed out, there is a strong connection between the question about accountability and really sort of key attributes around trust. We see accountability frequently mentioned among the high-level principles for AI. And for instance, if we're thinking about the way in which to build trustworthy systems within an organization, it is important to have clear lines of accountability, to know who it is within the team who is taking responsibility and will be held responsible for the levels of performance, be it the accuracy, the reliability, the robustness of the system, but also understanding and anticipating the way in which the system is going to be impacting on different kinds of stakeholders. So accountability is a very important aspect. The challenge, and accountability, of course, is always a key aspect toward trust, be it AI or other kinds of technologies. The new challenge that arises when we're using AI is, especially in systems that are using machine learning, that it can blur the lines as to who really is responsible for the ultimate behavior of the system. Can the party who is building the tool hold complete responsibility for its ultimate performance if that performance is going to be impacted by the kinds of data that it experiences throughout the time of use? There's also the large practice of using third-party tools, using libraries in order to build these systems, which can make it more difficult to understand where exactly which component has contributed to something. So in order to be able to establish clear trust in the system, it is important that we will be establishing clear lines of accountability that may include the requirements around, for instance, the use of standards, contractual requirements around that if you're going to use a third-party system, that third party has to provide certain levels of continued monitoring, perhaps. So there is accountability is a key element, and we will need to have clear guidelines around how to allocate and clearly communicate who has taken responsibility for which component of the system's performance. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ansgar. And Clara, we haven't heard from you yet. What's your thoughts on accountability?
Thank you. So I agree with Ansgar that accountability is, of course, closely linked to responsibility, very often also to a liability. So actually, that's maybe, of course, it's important, but it is important to take out, so in order to arrive to trustworthy systems, which basically is the basis for having trust in these systems, it would be important to take it out from this corner of liability and to make it, let's say, a positive challenge, in the sense that if you are engaging in responsible AI development, there is also an incentive, a social and maybe possibly also an economic incentive to embark on this journey. And so, of course, traditionally accountability, when we talk about products and services, it's the entity who puts that product and services into the market. But of course, as Ansgar, you mentioned, this is more difficult in self-learning system because they might change their output throughout the time. And or what I think is also important, they are, of course, very specific on the context that they are being used. For instance, you cannot use a companion robot which was designed for elderly people to childcare, for instance. So the question is, of course, then who's liable also with putting, not only putting it to the market, but also how you use these systems. And I would just like, I know I don't have too much time, but I think there are two things that we need to take into account, namely these lines of responsibility that Ansgar just mentioned, that is inside the organization. And also, what do we need to do to arrive to an ecosystem of trust? Because we are now also having systems that interact with each other and integrated. So just within organization, I would just like to echo, let's say, the position of the engineer. So I'm also myself a computer scientist, and we had several sessions with our members, and also to see where they see their responsibility, so the developers of these systems. And I think that the one outcome is that although engineers clearly see an individual responsibility for ethical dilemmas, they also, it is clear that they are within a hierarchy of power with, in an organization. So there is always also a trade-off also within, let's say, creating a culture of a no-blame culture, let's say, so that engineers are encouraged to address ethical dilemmas, if you want so, and of course to then have certain consequences. It's important to have, as you just mentioned, these structures and hierarchies so that they know with whom to discuss if they encounter ethical dilemmas. So this is just a little bit I wanted to say about issues within organizations. But as regards the ecosystem of trust, that we are starting to build, we have now object recognition systems which are embedded into transport, which are used in manufacturing, or public services that are using speech generation, GPT-3, for instance, that was just mentioned before. So I think that here where you have citizens who will require, or already require, of course, these public services to be fair and transparent. And it will be important then for organizations to integrate these solutions to be informed. So we have something like an informed trust. And one way to do this is, of course, to make your internal measures public. So if you have only internal measures like ethics boards, that might not be sufficient, because then the others don't know what you actually mean by being transparent. So as Ansgar mentioned, measures to do this could be through audit, certification, and standards. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Abdul Hakim, you kind of addressed this lack of accountability question previously, but anything to add to that?
Yes, my understanding of the major cause of AI mistakes is actually bias. And so the quick answer is that it depends. For example, if you have flaws in the models and algorithms arising from the limitations of the developers, then arguably you would hold developers accountable. However, if the data used to train the AI systems is either flawed or partial due to lack of, for example, African developers and African-oriented data, then there's an onus on the developers and the AI trainers. But if you have faults arising from the misapplication or endeavoring to adapt AI systems to processes that they were not designed for, then arguably you could lay the blame at the feet of the original equipment manufacturers and particularly the vendors. And of course, there are errors that arise from from the end user misuse or misuse by the end user of these AI platforms. And so, you would lay it at the feet of the developers. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Good point. I want to go to some audience questions now. The first one, I think, Ansgar, would be good for you to address. And the question is, isn't it helpful to assess and determine human bias against AI systems when trying to implement those systems in a healthy way? In different geographies, different requirements and principles maybe might be adopted respective to the society's approaches to those AI-supported systems as a whole. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question because it touches on a number of aspects around bias, which are really sort of the reasons why it's such a difficult issue to ultimately resolve. In a sense, Abdul Hakim already touched on this. There's the question about we have cultural kinds of differences in which and a need for the developers to understand the kinds of cultural contexts in which the system is being used. I think Yoko also already touched on an important aspect regarding really self-understanding amongst the people who are developing the system. So within, for instance, the algorithmic bias consideration standard that we're developing within IEEE, sort of a guiding concept really around our work is the need for the people who are developing and deploying the systems to really consciously engage with the kinds of decisions that are being made when developing the system. Why did we choose this particular optimization target? Why did we select this data set to train the system, to validate the system? And not just internally, why did we do this, but do we have a clear set of justifications that we would be able to present to the stakeholders who will be impacted by this system, and would in fact be willing to engage in a dialogue to explain why we consider these to be the appropriate justifications for our choices that went into the system. There is a potential flip side also to the way in which the question was formulated around bias within people and the way in which they engage with using AI systems. And so that is also an interesting kind of question, which particularly gets at, for instance, the potential of loss of benefits by not using an AI system simply because of a lack of trust in it. So, for instance, medical diagnostic systems could potentially, automated systems can potentially be better than the available medical personnel at doing certain radiological image assessments and those kinds of things. So I think that gets, in a sense, back to one of the things that Yoko was mentioning around confidence, a need for people to be able to gain sufficient confidence in how these systems operate in order to be able to make that kind of adjusted judgment as to whether we should be trusting these systems. So, and that's where things like training, not just of the technical people involved in the system, but the wider population becomes an important aspect.
Great, thanks, Ansgar. We have another audience question that Parminder, I think it'd be great for you to address. So the question is, how do we neutrals navigate trust in AI from the perspective of the China-US digital Cold War? Because really, who and what side of the divide do we trust between these juggernauts?
Yeah, that's an excellent highest level question. And that's where I was actually talking about earlier about representativity, that people trust with all those flaws of our democracies and nation-based global systems, we tend to trust the people we can pull out of power and put in our, and you don't trust colonial masters, which in a bipolar world of China and the US would control much of the intelligence. And I go back to the example I was earlier talking, you have a appointment with your barber, it will be mediated through AI, which located in one of these two centers, and they become like brains of everything which happens in the rest of the world. So this is actually a challenge, and we need to therefore go back to there is a principle of subsidiarity in discourses of democracy and governance, that something which can be decided at a lower level in an effective manner should not be decided at another upper level. So the intelligence systems of our world should be made in a manner that I have a handle over things which affect me. And generally, people tend to have a handle over things vis-a-vis circles which they can influence. So right now, intelligence has this tendency to hyper concentrate, and that's why we have a bipolar world. And this hyper concentration, which is almost its technical and economic propensity, has to be countered by a political human effort to deconcentrate decision making. Well, that's kind of a system design which we have to be consciously thinking about.
Great, thanks, Parminder. I think we have time for one more audience question, and there was a specific question for Clara. The audience member asked if you could share more about the interaction between the technical engineers and ethical moral frameworks during R&D phase or assessment, and how that relationship can be more solid.
Thank you for that question. I think that coming back to how to establish trust in this ecosystem. So I agree that one important thing is the design. And I would just give you the example of of the contact tracing apps that we are all talking about and that we would so much desperately need in the second wave of the coronavirus. Still, it's not used too much. And the question is why? Definitely, it's a question of trust. It is an individual trust. So stakeholders, in my view, were not involved sufficiently. So it's maybe the designers took into account one parameter, namely privacy. And I think that this was very much respected. However, if we think now about the contact tracing apps, probably we would need also, these contact tracing apps for public health officials so that they can identify clusters and maybe prevent some lockdowns. However, this is not possible with these contact tracing apps, first, because they were not adopted, and second, they would not even be possible to share this data with the healthcare officials. So my point is, if you take into account the end users and also the larger stakeholder groups, then you're able to do these trade-offs between privacy, let's say so, and also freedom, if you want, so freedom of movement now as a lockdown. And then you can make this decision, which are technical decisions, how to best design a system which will bring the most profit, let's say, so the best trade-off for the stakeholders. So the technical community, through now standards that we are developing, but also through certification and so on, they start or they have to interact with the end user, with the stakeholders, and take that into account in the design and also in the deployment of the systems. I think that is the key.
Great, thanks, Clara. And we're running down to the last few minutes, so I did want to give all the panelists an opportunity to do kind of a quick lightning round of what you think is the critical point to drive future action or dialogue, or any other key point that you had wanted to make. We have about 30 seconds or so per panelist, and we'll go in the reverse order of introduction. So Abdul Hakim, do you want to go first?
Yes, okay, very quickly. From an African perspective, we must thoughtfully consider articulating our own artificial intelligence philosophy. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The US, Western European AI philosophy in the battlefield, for example, is to eliminate false positives, i.e. you let some people through or some bad actors through while avoiding killing innocents. Whereas arguably in some of the Eastern powers, China, Russia, for example, their philosophy is to eliminate false negatives, which means just don't let anybody through, innocent or otherwise. So it's important for us in Africa to develop. And just to reinforce, trust is the key. Without trust, no one will use the platforms. And we need a series of confidence building measures. We need to achieve some level of predictability, be able to seek clarification, create understanding and the like. And back to the African situation, I must emphasize Africa and the rest of the world must factor, when looking at these AI and related issues, the unserved, the underserved, and the unborn. Like I said, because they must live with the precedents that we make today. And frankly, they will not know a non-AI world. So once it is done from here on forward. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Abdul Hakim. Parminder.
Yeah, so very quickly, I think the central concept today is trust. And it's not the first time the civilization or human systems have faced this problem. Trust is the basic problem of collective living, starting from the social contract itself. Social contract is a new trust method. So I think trust directly translates into social systems called institutions. Institutions are what gives us predictable rule-based behavior. And this AI-based world is going to be a very new world. We need to develop corresponding rule-based institutions. And I think institutions is what trust really translates into as social structures. And institutions are products not of technologists, but by social scientists, politics, democracy, and thing. And I think the two should be matched. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I think we have about time for one or two sentences from the remaining three. So Yoko, what would you say is key?
I think we are now under the corona to build a foundation for a long-lasting, system, as Pamela said, is most important for all of us, citizen, industries, organization, international. I think we really have to build an international governing system.
Great, thanks. Clara?
Yes, so I think that it is important to have open and consensus-based processes involving different stakeholders in order to define the principles, the trade-offs that we need, but also to define those principles and how to implement and validate them. I think that's towards what I mentioned before, to have this informed trust. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Ansgar, you get the last word.
I'd like to just reiterate this point about we need engagement by all stakeholders. And with that, I would mean not just the different regions of the world, very important to include Global North and Global South, but also to make sure that we involve not just the policymakers, not just the technical community, but the communities who are going to be impacted by this use, the societal various societal groups. So really a broad multi-stakeholder approach to this. Thank you.
Great, thanks Ansgar. And I want to really thank all of our panelists today for a great discussion. I want to thank the Internet Governance Forum for hosting this event and for all of you for participating. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.